You want me to put my mouth where?" Temperance Blackwell's voice shattered the silence of the bedroom like a gunshot, her massive frame recoiling as if she'd been struck. The shocked giant mail-order bride stood there in her wedding night chemise, all 6 feet 3 inches of her trembling, staring down at the rich cowboy who'd just made a request that turned her stomach inside out. Cormac Sterling sat on the edge of their marriage bed, still fully dressed in his wedding shirt, his hands gripping his knees so hard his knuckles had gone white. He wouldn't look at her, couldn't look at her. His head was bowed like a man waiting for execution, and something about that posture made Temperance's anger falter for just a heartbeat before roaring back twice as strong. She'd been bought, paid for like cattle. $3,000 her father had taken from this stranger, signing away his too big, too strong daughter to a man she'd never met. And now he wanted this. "I ain't some saloon girl," she spat, her Pennsylvania accent thickening with emotion. "I ain't some—" But her voice cracked because the truth was she didn't know what she was anymore. Not a daughter. Her father had made that clear when he'd forged her signature on the marriage contract. Not a woman. Not really. Not when every man she'd ever known had looked at her like she was a circus attraction. The shocked giant bride felt hot tears spilling down her cheeks, hating herself for crying, hating Cormac Sterling for bringing her all the way to Montana just to humiliate her like this. The rich cowboy finally lifted his head, and Temperance sucked in a sharp breath. His eyes were red. Not from crying exactly, but from the kind of exhausted grief that goes bone deep and never really leaves. He looked at her the way a drowning man looks at the shore, desperate, disbelieving, like he didn't think he deserved rescue, but, God, he wanted it anyway. "I'm sorry," Cormac whispered, his voice so broken it hurt to hear. "I shouldn't have. I don't know what I was thinking." He stood up fast, putting distance between them, his hands raised like he was surrendering. "You can have your own room. I won't touch you. The arrangement stays business, that's all. Just business." He moved toward the door, and Temperance watched him go, confusion churning with her anger, because this wasn't how predators acted. This wasn't how men who wanted to use women behaved. The shocked giant mail-order bride had seen plenty of those back in the coal camps, men who took what they wanted and laughed about it after. But Cormac Sterling looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards, like her rejection had confirmed something terrible he'd always believed about himself. "Wait," she heard herself say, though she didn't know why. The rich cowboy stopped, his hand on the doorframe, his shoulders hunched like he was bracing for a blow. "Why'd you ask me that?" Temperance's voice came out smaller now, genuinely confused. "If you didn't mean it, why'd you say it?" Cormac was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Because I'm a fool," he said. "Because I thought maybe—" He cut himself off, shaking his head. 3 years, Temperance. 3 years since Eleanor died birthing our son, and I haven't let myself want anything. Not food, not sleep, not company. Just work. Just keeping this ranch alive because it's all I had left of her." He finally turned around, and the look on his face made Temperance's breath catch. Raw. Completely raw. "Then you stepped off that train, and you were so—" He gestured helplessly at her. "So alive. So strong. And I thought maybe I could ask for something again. Maybe I could want something. But I was wrong. I'm sorry." The shocked giant bride felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she'd built to survive her father's betrayal and the long, lonely train ride west. This wasn't about humiliating her. This was about a man so starved for connection, he'd forgotten how to ask for it properly. The rich cowboy had bought a bride because he was dying of loneliness, and now he was apologizing for being human enough to want her. Temperance took a step toward him, then another, watching his eyes widen with something like fear. What else? She asked quietly. What else were you gonna say? I was so… what? Cormac Sterling looked at his giant bride like she was a miracle he didn't deserve, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Beautiful, he said. You were so beautiful. Temperance actually laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound that came from years of being called everything but that. Break horses with my bare hands, she said flatly. I got shoulders wider than most men. Back in Pennsylvania, they called me the Blackwell Giant, and they didn't mean it kind. She crossed her massive arms over her chest, a defensive gesture she'd perfected over 26 years of being too much. Don't lie to me just because you paid for me. The rich cowboy's jaw tightened, and something shifted in his expression, the grief receding just enough to let anger spark through. I don't lie, Cormac said, taking a step toward her instead of away. Not about this, not about anything that matters. He moved closer, and Temperance found herself frozen, watching this smaller man approach her without fear. Without that look men usually got when they realized how easily she could hurt them. You want to know what I saw when you stepped off that train? He asked. I saw a woman who'd survived something. I saw strength that wasn't mean or cruel, just there, like a mountain's there. I saw someone who might understand what it's like to be looked at wrong. His voice dropped lower. And yeah, Temperance, I saw a woman so beautiful it hurt to breathe. The shocked giant bride felt her throat close up because nobody had ever said anything like that to her, not once in her entire life. Then why? She had to stop, had to swallow past the lump blocking her words. Why'd you ask me to do something that made me feel like a whore? Cormac flinched like she'd slapped him. Because I'm broken, he said simply. Because Eleanor was gentle and sweet, and she let me lead in everything, and I got comfortable being the strong one. But when she died, his voice cracked. When she died, I couldn't be strong anymore. I couldn't lead. I couldn't even get out of bed for 3 months. He looked away, shame coloring his face. My foreman ran the ranch. My sister came from Denver to keep me from starving. And when I finally could function again, I realized I was tired, Temperance. Tired of pretending to be something I'm not. The rich cowboy met her eyes again, and the vulnerability there was so intense, it felt like looking directly at the sun. I thought maybe with you, I could stop pretending. I thought maybe someone strong enough wouldn't need me to be strong all the time. I thought… He laughed bitterly. I thought I could ask you to take control, and you'd understand. But I didn't ask right. I didn't explain. I just made a crude demand like you were something I owned, and that's not… God, Temperance, that's not what I meant at all. The shocked giant mail-order bride stood there processing words that rearranged everything she thought she understood about this night, about this man, about herself. The rich cowboy wasn't trying to demean her. He was trying to give her something, power, maybe, or trust, or something so tangled up in need and vulnerability, she didn't have a name for it. You want me to be in control? She asked slowly, testing the idea on her tongue. You want me to lead? Cormac nodded, his hands shaking at his sides. Not all the time, he said quickly. Not in everything. But in this, yeah. In the bedroom, in the intimate things, I want to know what it feels like to give myself to someone who won't break. To surrender to someone strong enough to handle all of me, even the weak parts. He took a shuddering breath. Eleanor was wonderful, but she was fragile. I was always so careful with her, always afraid I'd hurt her or scare her or want too much. And I did hurt her. She died giving me a son, died because I got her pregnant, and I can't… His voice broke completely. I can't do that again. Can't be the one in control when control is what killed her. Temperance felt tears streaming down her face because suddenly she understood. The rich cowboy wasn't asking her to debase herself. He was asking her to be exactly what she was, strong, powerful, unbreakable, and let him be exactly what he was. Broken, grieving, desperate to want something again without the terror that his wanting would destroy it. "Come here," Temperance said softly, and when Cormac hesitated, she closed the distance herself, her large hands cupping his face with a gentleness that belied her strength. "You should have just told me," she whispered. "Should have explained instead of just—" She shook her head. "I thought you saw me like everyone else does, like I'm only good for hard labor and carrying heavy things." The rich cowboy's hands came up to cover hers, his fingers so small against her palms. "I see you like nobody else does," he promised. "I see you exactly how you are, and Temperance, that's what I need. Not some delicate flower who'll wilt if I'm honest about what I want. I need someone real." The shocked giant bride felt something unlock deep in her chest, some prison door she'd been behind so long she'd forgotten it was there. She'd spent her whole life making herself smaller, quieter, less threatening, so men wouldn't run from her. But Cormac Sterling was standing here, asking her to be bigger, to be everything she was and more, to take up space and take control and take him, all of him, without apology. "Ask me again," Temperance said, her voice steady now. "But ask me right this time. Tell me what you really want." Cormac's eyes widened, hope and fear and desperate need all tangled together in his expression. "Are you sure?" he breathed. "Because once I ask, once we cross this line—" "Ask me," she commanded, and felt power surge through her veins like lightning when the rich cowboy's breath hitched at her tone. Cormac Sterling sank to his knees in front of his giant bride, and the sight of this proud rancher kneeling before her made Temperance's heart hammer so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I want you to touch me," he said, his voice rough with emotion and something darker, hungrier. "I want to feel your hands on me, those strong hands that can break fence posts and gentle horses, and know they could break me too, but they won't. I want you to take what you need from me without holding back, without being careful, without apologizing for wanting." His hands gripped her thighs through her chemise, not pulling, just holding on like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. "And yeah, Temperance, I want your mouth on me. I want to feel you learn me, explore me. Take your time with me like I'm something precious you're discovering for the first time." The shocked giant bride felt heat flood her body, pooling low in her belly, because nobody had ever talked to her like this, like her strength was desirable, like her size was an advantage rather than a curse. The rich cowboy looked up at her with eyes so full of naked vulnerability it should have made him weak, but somehow it didn't. Somehow his willingness to kneel, to ask, to surrender, made him seem stronger than any man she'd ever known. "I don't know how," Temperance admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Nobody's ever wanted me to." She felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment, because here she was, 26 years old and completely ignorant about the intimate things married people did. Back in the coal camps, the women had whispered about their husbands' demands, always making it sound like a duty, a chore, something to endure. But this didn't feel like enduring. This felt like power. Cormac's hands slid up to her waist, his touch gentle but grounding. "Then we'll learn together," he said. "I'll teach you what I like, and you'll discover what makes you feel powerful. That's what this is, Temperance. It's not about degrading you or making you into something you're not. It's about both of us being honest for the first time in our lives." He stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, and started unbuttoning his shirt with hands that trembled slightly. "I'm terrified right now," he admitted. "Terrified you'll see me and think I'm not enough, that I'm too small, too broken, too needy." His shirt fell open, revealing a lean, work-hardened chest marked with old scars. "But I'm more terrified of spending another day pretending I don't need anyone, pretending I'm fine alone." The shocked giant bride reached out with one massive hand and pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her fingers. Her hand nearly spanned his entire rib cage, and the size difference should have made her self-conscious, but instead it made her feel protective, possessive even. "You're not alone anymore," she said firmly. "And I'm not either." She let her fingers trail down his chest, watching his breath catch, feeling the power of affecting him this way. "Teach me," she said again, echoing his earlier words. "Show me how to touch you. Show me how to make you feel the way you're making me feel right now, like I'm exactly right instead of all wrong." The rich cowboy caught her exploring hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "You start by trusting your instincts," Cormac said. "You start by understanding that your strength is what I need, not something you have to hide." He guided her hand back down his chest, lower, to the buckle of his belt. "And you understand that when I ask you to put your mouth on me, when I grab your hair and tell you not to stop?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm trusting you with the most vulnerable parts of myself. I'm giving you power over me that could destroy me if you wanted." Temperance felt tears prick her eyes again, because she understood now. The rich cowboy wasn't trying to use her. He was trying to trust her. And trust, real trust, required vulnerability from both of them. "I won't hurt you," she promised, her voice fierce. "I won't break you." Cormac smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him since she'd arrived in Montana. "I know," he said. "That's why I asked you to marry me." His hands moved to her face, pulling her down for a kiss that started gentle but quickly turned hungry, desperate, full of 3 weeks of tension and 3 years of loneliness finally finding release. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Temperance made her decision. "Lie down," she commanded, surprised by the authority in her own voice. The shocked giant bride watched the rich cowboy's eyes darken with desire as he obeyed without hesitation. Stretching out on their marriage bed and looking up at her with such trust it made her hands shake. "I'm going to learn every inch of you," Temperance said, climbing onto the bed with him, feeling the mattress dip under her weight. "And you're going to tell me what feels good and what doesn't, and we're going to figure this out together." She straddled his hips, her powerful thighs bracketing his smaller frame, and leaned down until her long black hair created a curtain around their faces. "But Cormac Sterling, you listen to me. If you ever make me feel like a whore again, if you ever forget to use your words and just demand things like, 'I'm property,' I will leave this ranch and you'll never see me again. Understood?" The rich cowboy nodded, his hands coming up to grip her muscular arms. "Understood," he breathed. "I promise, Temperance. I'll always explain. I'll always ask right." She kissed him hard enough to bruise, pouring all her fear and hope and desperate need into it, and when his hands tangled in her hair, not controlling, just holding, she understood what he'd been trying to tell her all along. This wasn't about domination. It was about trust, about two broken people finding the courage to be vulnerable with each other, about a giant woman and a grieving man discovering that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need someone. The shocked giant bride pulled back just enough to look into the rich cowboy's eyes and saw her own reflection there. Not a monster, not a freak, but a woman. Desired. Wanted. Chosen. "Teach me," she whispered one more time. And Cormac Sterling, with shaking hands and a voice full of love he hadn't known he could feel again, began to show his bride exactly how beautiful surrender could be. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains Eleanor Sterling had hung 5 years ago, casting golden patterns across the bedroom where two people had finally stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. Temperance woke first, her massive frame curled protectively around Cormac's smaller body, and for the first time in her entire life, She didn't immediately make herself smaller, didn't apologize for the space she took up in the bed. The rich cowboy was still asleep, his face peaceful in a way she suspected it hadn't been in 3 years. And the shocked giant bride felt her throat tighten with emotion as she watched him. Last night had changed everything, not just the physical intimacy, though that had been revelation enough. Learning that her strength could be gentle, that her size could make someone feel safe instead of threatened. But the emotional nakedness they'd shared. Cormac had taught her how to touch him, yes, but more importantly, he'd taught her that wanting wasn't shameful, that desire could be beautiful when it came with honesty and trust. And when he'd finally grabbed her hair, when he'd whispered those commanding words that had shocked her so badly at first, Temperance had understood the gift he was giving her. Control. Trust. The knowledge that this powerful man was choosing to surrender to her, and that choice made her more powerful than any physical strength ever could. She traced her fingers lightly over his shoulder, careful not to wake him, marveling at how someone so small could have such a huge impact on her heart. The shocked giant bride had spent 26 years believing she was unlovable, too much for any man to want, destined to live and die alone because nature had made her wrong. But Cormac Sterling had looked at her and seen right, had needed her exactly as she was, had given her permission to be big and strong and demanding, and then had loved her for it. Temperance felt tears sliding down her cheeks, the good kind this time, the kind that came from happiness so intense it had nowhere else to go. She'd been so angry yesterday, pointing her finger at him across the ranch yard, demanding answers about their arrangement, about what he expected from her. Looking back now, she could see her own fear in that anger, the terror that she'd been sold to a man who would use her like a work animal and discard her when she broke. But the rich cowboy hadn't wanted a work animal. He'd wanted a partner, someone strong enough to carry the weight he couldn't bear alone anymore, someone real enough to call him on his mistakes, someone brave enough to see past his grief to the man underneath who was still capable of love and desire and hope. Cormac stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly, and when he saw her watching him, a smile spread across his face that made him look 10 years younger. "Morning," he said softly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You're still here." The words were simple, but Temperance heard the fear beneath them, the fear that she'd wake up and regret everything, that the intimacy of the night before would feel different in daylight, that she'd realize she'd made a terrible mistake. "Where else would I be?" she asked, covering his hand with her own, much larger one. "This is home now. You're home now." The rich cowboy's eyes filled with tears that he didn't bother hiding. "I love you," Cormac said, the words tumbling out like he couldn't hold them back any longer. "I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. But Temperance, I love you. Not because you're strong or because you're beautiful, though God knows you're both, but because you're brave enough to be real with me. Because you didn't run when I showed you my broken parts. Because you're still here." The shocked giant bride felt her own tears flowing freely now. "I love you too," she whispered, and saying it out loud made it real in a way nothing else could. "I love you for seeing me, for making me feel like I'm enough, exactly as I am. For trusting me with the parts of yourself you keep hidden from everyone else." They lay there wrapped around each other as the sun climbed higher, talking about everything and nothing, about Cormac's plans to expand the ranch, about Temperance's dream of starting a horse breeding program, about Eleanor and how loving someone new didn't erase the love that came before, about Temperance's father and how some betrayals actually turned into blessings. They talked about the night before, too, with Cormac apologizing again for his clumsy initial request, and Temperance admitting that once she'd understood what he really meant, once she'd realized he was offering her power instead of taking it away, she'd felt more desired than she'd ever imagined possible. "I want to do this right," the rich cowboy said seriously, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. I want to court you proper, even though we're already married. Want to take you into town and show you off. Let everyone see how lucky I am. Want to buy you pretty dresses even though you'll probably rather wear work clothes, just so you know you have the option. Want to wake up every morning and choose you all over again. Temperance pulled him down for a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't. Gratitude, desire, promise, hope. We're going to be happy, she said when they finally broke apart. I know we are, because we're not pretending anymore. We're just us. And she was right. The months that followed brought challenges. Of course, ranch hands who didn't respect a woman boss until Temperance picked up the biggest troublemaker by his collar and set him down gentle but firm outside the property line. Townsfolk who whispered about the odd couple until they saw how Cormac looked at his giant bride like she hung the moon. Lonely nights when grief snuck up on both of them, and they had to learn to comfort each other through it. But they faced it all together. The rich cowboy and his shocked giant mail-order bride, two broken people who'd found the courage to be vulnerable and discovered that vulnerability was actually strength. When their daughter was born the following spring, a tiny thing with Cormac's dark eyes and Temperance's determination, they named her Eleanor Rose Sterling, honoring the past while celebrating the future. And sometimes, when Cormac watched his wife carrying their infant daughter in one arm while hauling a hay bale in the other, he'd remember that wedding night when he'd asked for something he needed, and she'd been brave enough to say yes. The shocked giant bride had become the strong wife. The rich cowboy had become the vulnerable husband, and together they'd built something neither could have created alone. A love that didn't require pretending, a partnership that celebrated truth, and a family that proved sometimes the most unlikely pairings create the strongest bonds. Before we finish, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this story from right now? Drop your country and what time it is in the comments below. Whether it's morning coffee in Texas or late night in Tokyo, thank you for taking this journey with Temperance and Cormac. Your time matters, and I'm honored you spent it here with us.
Once again, Tales from the Wild West sends a huge thank you to all of you. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep creating. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.